Howdy, Roadrunners. Welcome back to another episode of the Data 42 podcast. My name is Kenneth Klein, and on today's episode, we'll be talking a little bit about leadership in the Air Force with our special guest today. But before we go into the questions about leadership and being an officer in the Air Force, first, I want to ask y'all to talk a little about yourself, maybe your educational history, as well as a quick summary or recap of your career in the Air Force.
All right.
So, Ian Black, graduated from Virginia Military Institute in 2010, where I got my commission. Career-long intel officer, so I've supported the RC-135s out of Offutt, deployed multiple times there, ACC staff deployed there, and then now out at Creech Air Force Base supporting the intel or the RPA community as the senior intel officer.
Cool. Jack Miwa, graduated and commissioned in 2016 out of DET 890, which is University of Virginia. I was at Liberty University as a crosstown cadet, but currently an MP9 pilot, so 18Xer. Went through that pipeline, and now I'm at Creech Air Force Base. I've done both launch and recovery and mission control ops. So done a deployment and to Afghanistan. Got back in March of this year, and yeah, it's me.
Captain Megan Ritzer. I graduated in 2014 from DET 925, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Go Badgers. I am a weather and environmental science officer, and I've done that my entire career. Started doing regional weather at Operational Weather Squadron, went to Korea, did some F-16 support there, came back, did Fort Bragg, so we did Army weather support. I got to deploy there to Kuwait and support missions in Iraq and Syria, and then I came back stateside, and now I'm up at Creech Air Force Base doing RPA support there as well.
Okay, awesome. So the first question we have, we can go in, I guess, chronological order. So out of your respective commission sources, what is one lesson you learned while you're at RTC, whether it be during class or maybe a POC job you had, or maybe just from a mentor that you took with you in your career, and how has that helped you?
Yeah, so two things for me. Is my very first commander when I got to Offutt said, "Congratulations, you're going to SEER." And I looked at him and I said, "Why?" And they said, "When you get back, I'll tell you why." And when I got back from survival school, my commander said, "So what did you think of the event?" And I said it was probably the most miserable but rewarding experience of my life. And she replied back to me, she goes, "Good, I wanted you to have that experience. And what I want you to take away from this is never say no." So when you are presented an opportunity, don't go in with no. Think about it. Every opportunity you have or every opportunity that's presented to yourself will open a door and close a door, or open several doors or close several doors, right? And so think about all those decisions before you actually sit there and say yes or no. That's probably the biggest lesson I've learned. And then the other one is failure is not necessarily bad. That's what we learn from as leaders: self-evaluation, self-reflection. Being at Creech, and Colonel O'Brien and I talked about this on the drive up yesterday to was it North Texas where we were? No, Texas State yesterday. Was Creech having 45 minutes of drive to and from work, and it gives me plenty of time to reflect and get my mind right. So then when I come home and I'm with my family, it's work's already long gone. It's in the rear view mirror, and I get to devote and invest that time with the family. So
Awesome.
Yeah, I would say from ROTC, the biggest thing that I learned was ask questions on why things and why the Air Force does things a certain way, even if it's in an official publication like an AFI or something like that. So a little background on me: so I was disqualified from UPT, and I was also disqualified from all rated positions as well. One thing that my DET commander did is he basically called AFPC and was like, "Well, I understand why he can't be in an ejection seat aircraft like a T6, but why can't he sit in a GCS for 8 hours a day or something like that?" And he basically, they rewrote the whole RPA requirements for that. So he kind of paved the way for a bunch of people that had the same condition as me, and it helped that he was a full bird. So, but he still asked the tough questions, even if it's written in stone.
So it's hard going last because
Yeah.
they pick all the good ones. But,
You go first next time. How about that?
But I think I have two things as well. The first one is to have a plan. And my DET commander is always, every weekend, have a wingman, have a plan. And it applies to so many different things. So if you have someone to do things with that you trust, somebody to work together with, that's your team and your wingman, and then have a plan on what you're going to do. So I would say ROTC was arguably one of the most organized Air Force organizations I was a part of, which doesn't sound like much when you're like a cadet, but the fact that we prepared op orders, we put, the specific training objectives, we submitted those to, our higher up, our POC leadership, our higher ups, and then even to like the OPSO and stuff, and got those reviewed and got feedback. That was kind of fundamental leadership lesson that I've kind of taken forward, and knowing that you don't always need a 100% plan, because most of the time you're going to have to change it anyways. So to be able to have a plan with a lot of flexibility is good. And then I think the second thing, kind of having a wingman, having those people you rely on, I'd be ashamed to say if I didn't mention, when I went through ROTC, I lived with 10 of my peers and my cadets in ROTC, and we are still now very good friends, and we kind of have maintained, all in different career fields, that kind of like excellence and relying on each other. And I mean, Captain Mua this morning was like, hey, he worked with one of my friends kind of in Afghanistan, and so I was like, hey, how did this end up working out? I just texted her this morning, and she let me know she's
Cool
killing
feedback.
it where she's at. So awesome to make those connections and kind of keep that lasting relationship through your active duty service and leaders, because everyone goes through different leadership opportunities.
Awesome. So y'all kind of touched on my next question.
With that,
Obviously.
I can read it, so.
So y'all mentioned a little bit about your careers, and obviously the Air Force is pretty diverse with the amount of careers it offers. So you can answer this whether it's specific to your certain career field or just general. But what are some tips you have for our soon-to-be officers who are going on commission this semester, next semester, or the year after, to commission to the Air Force on the right foot? Like, what are some programs they take advantage of, or maybe just some tips and tricks to get settled in and be successful in the Air Force?
So I'll go first, but I'll still steal Major Black's comment. But it's really to take advantage of any opportunity you're granted. So when you're a new lieutenant and you're at a base, they have so many bullet writing seminars and public speaking, Toastmasters, and listening to different chiefs speak. And like, even though it might, and a lot of your peers will be like, yeah, it's kind of boring, or even like CGOC, I know that gets a lot of bad stigma, but realizing that those are like your organizations, so if you want to become a part of things like that, it kind of gives you a good baseline of experience to meet different people and like learn from different experiences. Mostly because I think, especially when you hear chiefs speak and stuff like that, you don't get a lot of enlisted interaction in ROTC. So once you kind of become active duty, listening to those senior NCOs and even the NCOs and getting their experience, because they're all excited to shape you as a butter bar as well. So that's what I have.
So is this more tailored towards ROTC programs or like active duty?
More
What's your
like
comment?
you just entered the Air Force after
Okay.
commissioning. What's, I guess, just some general tips and advantages of being ready?
Yeah, I would say as far as a tip, just, kind of, I mean, this was already said in the last question, but keep those contacts that you have, is because, you're never going to know when you're going to run into, someone in ROTC. So like when I was in Afghanistan, one of my good friends from ROTC, he was a year behind me, but he ended up being my own personal JTAC out in Afghanistan. Like he showed up about a month or two before I was done there, and that was it was just crazy, but it was cool because we got to integrate and go to see different units, and we basically got to let ourselves be known on the base that we're at in Afghanistan. And you're never going to know when you're going to run into someone who might need some advice, or that's in a different career field, and you can kind of reach out to officer to officer and say and ask for advice when in the field that you might not be an expert in. So
And so for me, the biggest piece of advice I give like a brand new lieutenant is I expect you to make mistakes, right? How many mistakes have you made? A bunch.
This week.
How many have you made? Yeah, like bunch. And I'm sure if you ask Colonel O'Brien, like he will say he's made a bunch of mistakes. Like that's the one commonality that we all have. And so like for me, what I look for out of my lieutenants is for them to make a decision. No matter what it is, like I look forward to them to make a decision because that's what as officers, we're paid to do. If the decision ends up backfiring, what we will do is we will come and we'll have a conversation. We'll debrief the thought process and the decision-making process behind the scenes. And it's never going to be like, hey, like you're in trouble for making this decision. It's like, okay, let's figure out how we could have gotten to a better decision, right? And so that's probably my biggest piece of advice is because I remember me as an officer, I was extremely lucky because I had Master Sergeant Kelly Mars, who guided me through those formidable lieutenant years, and she'd play a lot of very funny pranks on me along the way, and she was fantastic. So kind of talking or reiterating what Megan just said is like find those senior NCOs, those NCOs. They're not all created equal. Right, you're going to have to determine which ones you're going to attach yourself to, but finding those experienced ones, the FGOs, the more experienced captains, if you end up in an exec position when working for a commander, like utilize those opportunities, pick those individuals' brains so you can learn and then hopefully make less mistakes.
If I can tag on really quick, because that was really good. I think the most important thing is to not realize, because you're used to, the military is an organization, like not everything's going to be provided for you when you come in. And I think even in the rated community, the FTU is a unique, where there's a pipeline of training, but most of the other officers, like you come in and I'm the only weather officer on the base. And so I have to kind of find my own way, right? And so to just realize that and take those opportunities to make mistakes and just go for it and find your own way, because you're going to have to, and that's part of leading.
Yeah. And the big caveat is like can't be like illegal, immoral, or unethical.
Right.
That's like the three. If it's like if it touches any of those three things, then like that's a bad mistake. But if you're like, all right, you guys, like first snow of the season, we're gonna go snowboarding at noon, and then like somebody like me comes walking around, I'm like, where are all my intel folks? And they're like, oh, they're up on the slope skiing. Like it's like, like let's talk about this here.
Yeah.
Like I would sit there and be like, bold move, love it, but like, hey, next time let me know. Maybe we can do like a squadron event, so it's not just a small team. Maybe it's a bigger, larger team building event or something along those like great decision, great thought process, but like, hey, let's let's make sure we don't get our boss in trouble, because somebody broke a leg out on the ski slopes and he or she does not know that half their team is out there skiing. So.
Sounds like a very specific.
Yes.
Sounds like something that happened.
Don't worry, sir. It didn't happen in your squadron.
And I will say for the rated community, just a piece of advice is to just be ready to transition, and maybe not even for the rated community, just be ready to transition to an Air Force style of learning, because college and ROTC is a different style of learning than Air Force. So when you go to UPT or you go to CISO training, you're going to be listed with a bunch of documents. It could be 4,000 pages worth of stuff that you're going to be paid to know, and just be ready to actually to study in a different way, to where you might not have Quizlet, you might not have certain programs where all the answers are already laid out for you. So yeah.
Awesome. So you talked about it a little bit as well. During that process, as freshly, brand new fresh lieutenant to becoming a more senior lieutenant and promoting up, how do you handle that? Like, what's some tips and I don't want to say tricks, but of handling more responsibility as you become more and more comfortable with your position, and they give you more and more free rein, less leash to do your job?
So for me, when I talk to like lieutenants and captains and stuff like that, like this is a very difficult question to answer, because the way I lead is going to be the way that like these other two lead, and it's going to be different than whenever you get in the Air Force. What works for me is not necessarily going to work for you. So what I like to do is build a culture of empowerment. I like to push things down to the lowest level as possible. Right, my superintendent, Master Sergeant Matt Kiefer, like he is an equivalent to me. Like, we delegate and we split everything, even though he's a master sergeant, even though I'm a major, right? But then we also empower the flight commanders, we empower the lieutenants, we empower the NCOs, we empower the airmen, right? And let them do the work, right? And so that's why it's kind of like difficult. Like, for me, and the environment that I like to create might not be the same type of environment that you are afforded or that you would like to create or how you would like to lead. But that's kind of how I approach it. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
I kind of did. I tap danced around it, but
Yes, sir. I would say that answered my question.
Yeah. I would say for me, it's before, at least in the rated field, it's all about becoming an expert of like your primary duty. So when you become an expert, and it could take a little while, of operational experience, but once you become an expert and maybe not knowing all of the answers, but at least knowing where we get those answers from, that's paramount. To where when someone comes to you, as a leader with a question, you might not have that answer right there, but at least have the humility to know where to look it up, what document to say, hey, like, this is why you can't travel to this location because this stuff happens there, or XYZ.
So I'll kind of piece those two together because I'm in a career field where my first part of my career is becoming a technical expert, but then also, like, you can't always, if you don't, when you're in kind of a support, you have so many airmen, you can't always be the expert, like, in their back ear telling them things. So you have to, that's where the empowerment piece comes in. So you have to be that expert and dedicate that time, but also empower that expertise to your airmen. So that kind of is piecing those two together. But as that transition, from a lieutenant to first lieutenant, which is important, and then even a captain, is trusting your gut. Trusting that confidence that you have built from making those mistakes and learning from those mentors, and being like, hey, I've seen this again. And I really didn't see it until, like, this is my third flight command, and now I'm like, okay, I don't have to worry about these things because I know I've handled these things before. But now I have all of these other bigger things to look at, and then you kind of see, all right, these are what, Major Lance, the guy I replaced, he's like, hey, these are some ways you can become better. I'm like, oh, this is great, especially as a captain, be like, okay, these are ways I can grow. So trusting that confidence in the decisions you've made in the past, whether or not you've made the right decision, but using that to help make your decisions in the future.
So y'all all mentioned great examples of good leadership and how it helped you in your career. Do you have any advice for newly commissioned officers who are struggling to find that mentor or struggling to find like a mentorship program?
I'll start because I had 6 lieutenants, brand new second lieutenants in my last flight, and I know you have a ton more, so you have more experience. But it was interesting because I just felt like I was a lieutenant, so I don't know. I don't know how I'm supposed to lead these people. But
you will blink, and then all of a sudden you'll be like a major or a senior captain or
Yeah.
something like that. But when you're in the moment, you're like, oh, this day's so long. Sorry for interrupting,
No,
Megan,
no.
but I think
No.
it's like,
Yes,
funny.
it's like, it's incredible. And Sergeant Carvalho can tell you a funny story about that when I was a lieutenant. But I think for them is to be honest with the people you do know. Because I had one of my lieutenants come to my office for doing midterm feedback, and he was like, hey, ma'am, I'm really not, I don't really have any friends here. I'm not finding, I don't really feel like I have a mentor. I have a couple people I talk to over in this area, but like I don't feel like I'm growing, and this is not what I imagined. And it's hard because it was during COVID, right? So we couldn't have those relationships. That's kind of what I talked to you earlier. You have to kind of open yourself up to meet different types of people. And so I kind of had to talk to him, and I've been in that same place before, coming to a new place, even at Creech, not knowing anybody and just kind of making those connections. But what I kind of advised him to do is, open those doors and talk to people you wouldn't really talk to. I mean, he's a jock, right? So like super athlete, snowboard, football, all these things, and a lot of the other lieutenants in our flight weren't that way. And so I was like, you know what, maybe you don't have all of the same interests, but maybe if you take the time to get to know them and hang out with them, and you guys go to some kind of event, you'll meet other people. It's just a way. So just be open to meeting different people and learning from different people's experiences. You'd be surprised how much everyone has in common, which I'll do a side plug for trivia is great because you can tell who knows the same interests because people answer questions the same. So that's always a good icebreaker, and there's trivia in every city. So It's kind of my advice.
Good point. Kind of to talk about what I've already talked about, but just maintaining those contacts from ROTC, people that are maybe a step or two above you or a year or two above you that could be in a similar AFSC. You could always reach out to them. I mean, I'm not sure if you all have Facebook still or anything like that, but that's a tool I use to network, honestly. Is just to send a message to someone, if I'm going to a new place or a new TDY, just being like, hey, you open to meet up or anything like that. But just being an active member in your squadron, in your training flight, if you're going to training, show up to the events. And first Fridays are a thing in a lot of squadrons on a lot of bases. Going to those volunteer events are all great opportunities to meet new people, network, and ask for advice for sure.
I mean, I'd say mentorship goes both ways, right? There are certain aspects or certain things that, like these two individuals that have experienced in their career that I've never experienced. One, because we're different career fields or different locations or different challenges, right? So a lot of times people focus on like, oh, I need to go find that 06 mentor or that 05 or GO level mentor. But like you can also find like lessons learned and mentorship from either peers. Also the enlisted force, like Chief Dallas within our squadron is like one of the guys I go and talk to quite a bit to go figure out more and everything, just because he has 20 plus years in the Air Force. He's seen almost everything. So like not always will like the mentor be your squadron commander, your DO, or your flight commander, or your wing commander. Like, right, there's plenty of other people that can provide that mentorship as well.
Awesome. So to go a little bit further into what makes a good leader, because we have touched on it a little bit, especially in my class right now in AS and RTC, we're learning about a lot of the qualities that make a strong leader in the Air Force, like communication and whatnot. During your experience in the Air Force, has there been some like lesser talked about or more uncommon traits that have made a strong and competent leader? And that's kind of a loaded question, but
So did you want to go? Okay. So one thing that stuck with me, and it was from like when my dad was in the Air Force. He was working for a general out in Germany, and my dad, Staff Sergeant Black back in the day, was going around and cleaning up or like picking up the trash around the office, and went into the general's office like, hey sir, I'm taking the trash out. And he's like, don't you dare touch my effing trash. That's my trash. I will take it out. And my dad shared that story with me when I became a brand new lieutenant. And that can be applied across so many different types of things. When you sit there and you say like, hey, the standard is 8 to 4. Like, are you showing up at 8:15 and leaving at 3:30, right? What kind of message if your dudes and dudettes are still sitting in the office or they're scared to move? Me as a brand new lieutenant, my flight commander was very authoritative. Like, I was terrified of that individual, and I did not dare even think about showing up before 7 or after 7:15 or leaving before 4:45 in the afternoon, right? And so finding that balance between like right, taking care of your team, empowering, backing up what you do or what you say, right? And kind of like the whole thing, it's like, no, that's my trash. I will take it out. I will take care of my stuff, and then I will also take care of you.
So one of the things, so I just got done with Squadron Officer School. It's like a captain's course back in the spring of this past year. And one thing that really stood out to me is knowing your strengths and weaknesses. So for me, took a personality test about what type of leadership style, or it may not have been leadership, just personality style. And one thing I'm good at, and that actually made sense when I took this quiz, is that I'm a good communicator. So like I talk about, like I've already mentioned, making contact with people and remembering like, oh, like that's my friend Mike from RTC, and he's in Intel now, so I'll hit him up. And then conversely, knowing your weaknesses is probably more important, to know where you struggle at as a leader, and the messages that you don't know that you're not sending, or so like for me, I'm an introvert, so sometimes coming out of my comfort zone and being an extrovert, being loud when I need to, or speaking up when something's not going the right way is can be a challenge. So getting out of your comfort zone and knowing your weaknesses as well as the weaknesses of the people you're leading as well. Sometimes it might take sitting down with your members and maybe having them go through a similar type of personality test, and just to let them know of what their strengths and weaknesses are as well can go a long way.
Again, it's hard to know ask all these types of questions. But I think honestly, it's like to show you care and to have those types of, so like you said in your AS200 class, you have a lot of, the Air Force provides you a lot of structure and requirements for, you have to give feedbacks. We have to have yearly training on sexual assault prevention and response. We have to have yearly training on suicide prevention and all of these things, and discussions on diversity and inclusion, and they're all requirements that come down. And it comes down very harshly because that's how there's too many people to like say it nicely, right? So you have to make it a requirement, but it's being a creative leader, an innovative leader, to have those conversations all the time, regularly. Like, don't wait for the annual requirement, because if you take the time, part of that is just sitting down with people and talking to them about their life. Those things will come up. If you sit down and have those types of conversations, people will respect you for knowing having that vested interest in them, and then also that gives them an opportunity and a platform to speak about what's bothering them, and that's a really great leadership tool especially as you continue to go up and you have more and more people to kind of sit down and talk to the youngest airman and say like, hey, actually you leave right at 4 every single day. What do you do for 6 hours every night? Usually it's playing video games. But no, but seriously, it's like, well, I go and I volunteer at the animal shelter and then I do this, and just showing them that little bit. And so that way because you go through all these scenarios and it's like you missed these things or you didn't realize somebody was struggling with this. But if you think about it, like that's a daily effort. That's a daily sense of awareness that you have about your people, and then knowing their weaknesses or knowing where they're struggling and ways that you can help them out. I think that kind of helps. Having that care and that personal attention is definitely the way to go. It's hard. It's definitely hard.
And then to piggyback on hers, one of the things I do is I say hi to everybody, right? Because you just never know like how a simple hi will change somebody's day, or maybe they'll open up to you and sit there and be like, hey, I'm in Korea, like I don't know anybody, I'm really lonely, like I need help here, bro. And you just never know what a simple hi or how are you doing or whatever. And you can also start to pick up on some of those indicators that Megan was referring to here, where hey, they're off a little bit today or something like that. Because I have one airman right now, like he sits in the very first desk when I walk in, and I can tell what kind of mood he is in just by his response when I say, hey, good morning, how are you? Right? And it's just because he's usually yelling it right back at me because I'm very loud. I'm an extroverted intel nerd. So like he is he's extremely introverted. And so like that's the game that we and I play. Like, right, and I can usually tell how his day is going. And then one thing I learned from my commander from my last deployment is he would always ambush me at the dining facility, and he would always sit there and be like, hey, Ian, how's your wife? How are your sports teams doing? And all those other types of things. And when I did my exit interview with him, I was like, sir, you impressed the hell out of me because like you just knew so much about me. And what he did, and he brought me back into his office, he opened up his top desk drawer, and he actually had an index card with everybody on it, like with their name. And he wrote like all the details and like every single conversation that he had with you over that period of time. So he had 8 months worth of data on me from a bunch of different types of conversations. And every night before he went to bed, he would go like flashcards, and he'd sit there and be like, all right, Lieutenant Klein, like married, dog, loves traveling the world, whatever it is. And then that's how he would engage people. And it was like one of the most impressive things, because we started off with like 50 people in this deployment, and then we grew to about 250 people. And so his Rolodex was just massive, but he invested the time in his people and knowing, and it really helped throughout the deployment to identify a bunch of those indicators that Megan had mentioned earlier. So
yeah. I think I'll give you a little secret that one of my chiefs gave me. He said, so I go into, it's a sidebar. I go into we're at the bowling alley or something. It's a Friday after work. And he goes, we all go up and order a beer, and he's like, LT, you got this one, right? And I'm like, of course, Chief. And then he's like, yeah, it's Enlisted Appreciation Day. I'm like, oh, I didn't know I have to, pony up for Enlisted Appreciation Day. I feel bad LT. And then about a month later, another Friday, we're in the club or something, and he's like, "Oh, LT, you got this one. It's Enlisted Appreciation Day." I'm like, "Chief, I thought that was last month." And he's like, "LT, that's every day." And I think, and it's very funny, and it's ironic, but I mean, I think if you embody that and knowing, like, when you're not, we don't see it a lot as officers, but when you're as much, we see a little bit of it. But imagine, like, all of your decisions being made, well, they are, but, like, you don't have any freedom to make any decisions to an extent, and that's where empowerment's important. But I think sometimes to kind of give back to those kind of a servant leader mentality, and that's still taking out the trash and helping clean up, and, oh, you shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't, but I want to because I want to do this with you. And so, especially working in office, it's not like you have as much, you can't go out in the field and do some tactical movements with your guys. Sometimes it is just cleaning up the building.
It shows that you're bought into the team mentality and those types of things, and that will make your job exponentially easier than sitting on like your gold-plated throne, issuing edicts and stuff like that. So
that's when your biggest mistakes are going to come, and no one's going to tell you.
Yep.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit about leadership styles, but as a leader, do you have any examples you can share about meeting a follower and having to adjust to maybe a different followership style, being able to reach them a different way? And again, maybe a personal example you can share with our cadets.
I can do one. I had a troop come in my office, tech sergeant getting promoted to master, and he's like, "Ma'am, I'm not creative." He's like, I'm a player on the team. I've played football all my life. I go out there and I run the plays. He's like, I don't make the plays. The coach calls them and I go and run the plays. And I'm like, all right. Because I was trying to do the empowerment piece, right? Where you give them this goal, right? With a little bit of guidelines and here, run with it. But that wasn't he came in, to his credit, came in and said, hey, I'm having trouble, thinking of a solution to this. So I'm like, all right. So I need to help give him a little bit more guidelines provide a solution. Not that he doesn't need to grow. I'm like, well, you're going to be a master sergeant. You're going to be in charge of people. You're going to have to start to learn these traits. So I had to kind of change how I was helping lead him and give him a little bit more guidelines to build him to that. But I think getting that feedback from him was very big and starting that process. So it would have been a little bit longer for us to kind of work to that point.
Mm-hmm. You want to take a shot?
Yeah. So one of the things that I do when I do like initial feedback is kind of going into like what you just mentioned or about 10 minutes ago, like personality styles, like introverted versus extroverted. Are people intrinsically or extrinsically, is that the correct term? Whatever. Internally or externally motivated, right? Like, so if like I'm internally motivated, then I'm going to give you more work to do because that is how people feel. Or maybe not more work, more challenging, more difficult tasks. Or if they're externally motivated, then maybe like more praise in public, right? If they're an introverted person, like, do you want to praise them in public? Probably not, because you're going to give them a heart attack and they're going to pass out when the commander comes walking in and handing out kudos and attaboys. But maybe like on a smaller scale, like maybe that's more appropriate. So I think that's kind of like tailoring and maybe like evaluating your environment or your team or something along those lines. Maybe you have a team full of a bunch of high performers, and then that's going to change like, right, your empowerment, how much you're going to empower. Or if you have an army of brand new lieutenants and brand new airmen, like, are you really going to be that bold to empower that team? Mm-hmm. or empower them as much? There's going to be a lot more coaching, a lot more maybe more directive instead of a lot of white space.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I would want to change their followership style or leadership style, because that's what they're born with. That was their upbringing. At least that's my perspective. But like Major Black just said, just like tailoring different opportunities to different people is huge. If they like going bowling and that sort of thing, maybe they can lead the next bowling event for your team or your squadron or something like that. And but I think it's on a person himself to maybe change their personality style and say like, hey, I'm not very good at playing this event, but I want the challenge, or maybe trying to tell them like, this could be a great opportunity for you in this, in leading this change of command or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
You're right, and how you message that as like a leader is like depending on their personality style. It's like, okay, introvert here. Like, so it's like, okay, you're not going to be the MC and like doing the DV escort and everything like that, but you're going to do all the background stuff and you're going to lead from the back. But then we have an extrovert over here and, right, like, and so like, okay, this is going to be the forward facing person doing all like the meeting and escorting and stuff like that. And right. And that's just going back to knowing your team and how to empower and how to lead. So.
Awesome. Those are all great responses. So that does come to the end of the questions we had for today about leadership. I do want to thank you all for your time and coming to talk with us today. And thank you all for watching the latest episode of the DET 42 podcast. Be sure to come back for the next episode where we're talking with Lieutenant Colonel Brian. Good. Thank you.